Tonight, we drift toward a shoreline where the city keeps a softer kind of wakefulness, and the air tastes faintly of salt and metal. The streets near the harbor are quieter than you would expect, as if the world has agreed to whisper here. On the water, lamps stretch into long, trembling lines, and cranes stand like tall, patient birds, moving only when they need to. A container ship rests at berth, vast and dark, with small points of light along its edges, like a floating neighborhood that never fully goes to sleep. You hear the low breath of engines somewhere deep inside the hull, and the occasional clang of steel meeting steel, a sound that arrives and then dissolves. The work is steady rather than hurried. Forklifts and terminal tractors pass like slow beetles between stacks of boxes, their headlights tracing the narrow paths across painted lanes. Those stacks rise in neat grids, colored steel blocks with numbers and letters as orderly as building bricks, yet each one holding its own small world. Some contain coffee or shirts or toys. Some carry spare parts for factories. Some hold medicine, and some are chilled like quiet refrigerators for fruit and flowers. At night, the port often feels busiest, not because it is loud, but because the schedule is relentless. Ships arrive according to tides, pilot windows, and long-planned rotations, and the dock keeps its promises with a calm determination. Above the quay, there is motion that feels almost ceremonial. A crane lowers its spreader, locks onto a box, lifts, pivots, and sets the weight down again with surprising grace. Each container is heavier than it looks, often measured in tons, and yet it is handled with the delicacy of a careful hand placing a book back on a shelf. If you stand here long enough, you begin to feel the rhythm, a choreography repeated hundreds of times, shift after shift, night after night. It is easy to forget that the shelves of a supermarket, the phone in your hand, the sofa in a living room, and the bolts that hold a bridge together all begin with moments like these. A port is a hinge in the world, and in the dark it creaks quietly, opening and closing, letting the planet's goods pass through. Tonight, we are not here for urgency. We are here for reassurance, for the feeling that the world can move immense weight without raising its voice, and that the roots of trade can feel in their own way like a lullaby. Somewhere in an office nearby, documents are checked and time stamps recorded, because even this graceful movement needs names, routes, and permission. And somewhere on the dock, a single container waits for its turn, a plain steel rectangle that will carry us gently into the story. The container does not look like a hero. It is a steel box, ribbed and weathered, with paint scraped in places where other boxes have leaned against it, and with a code stenciled on the side like a quiet name. Those letters and numbers are not decoration. They follow international conventions, so the box can be recognized across borders. And so its identity remains clear even when it has circled the globe many times. A small metal plate on the door often lists basic facts weight limits, inspection marks, and the month and year it was built, like the quiet biography of a tool. In this way, the container is a passport. It allows cargo to move through unfamiliar places without needing to explain itself again and again. A seal is clipped onto its doors, small but serious, so the contents can travel untouched from origin to destination, and the box becomes a promise. What is inside will remain inside. If you imagine the inside, it is surprisingly plain. A wooden floor, corrugated steel walls, the faint smell of resin and dust, and then the cargo, strapped, boxed, and braced so it will not slide when the ship rolls. Many containers are built to standard dimensions so they can stack safely and fit onto ships, trains, and trucks like pieces in one global puzzle. You may hear people measure capacity in TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, a simple way of counting how many standardized boxes a ship or port can handle. Some containers are 40 feet long, some are taller for extra volume, and a few are specialized open-top flat racks, tanks, or refrigerated boxes with their own quiet machinery. But most are plain, and that plainness is their power. Because when every port can expect the same corners, the same locking points, and the same strength, the world can build equipment around them with confidence. At the corners, twist locks bite and hold, letting a stack become stable even as wind and waves move around it. On deck, lashings and turnbuckles tighten like calm hands, keeping the tower of boxes secure through salt spray, weather, and long nights at sea. In the yard, containers rest in neat grids, colored blocks with codes, while software and radios guide workers to the right row at the right time. Tonight, we choose one container and follow it, not because it is special, but because it is ordinary, and in its ordinariness is the secret of modern trade. A single box can cross oceans without being opened, slip from ship to rail to truck, and arrive at a warehouse as if it has been carried by the night itself. And as we stay close to it, the vast world becomes understandable again, one quiet movement at a time. Before we trace our container's route, it helps to notice how invisible that route has become. In a shop, you lift a jar, a shirt, a small box of batteries, and the object feels immediate, as if it has always belonged on that shelf. But the truth is gentler and longer. Most goods spend far more time traveling and waiting than they do being used, and the calm of modern life is partly the calm of well-managed waiting. Tonight, you do not need to memorize the steps. You only need to feel the shape of the journey, like following a river from its mouth back towards its source. Our container begins not on the sea, but on land, at a factory or a farm or a warehouse, where items are gathered into pallets and cartons. A forklift slips its tines beneath a load, lifts, and places it inside the steel box with care, leaving just enough space for bracing and airflow. Then the doors close, the seal clicks, and the contents become quiet, as if tucked into a dark room. From that moment, the container is both simple and powerful. It is a single unit that can be moved by many different hands without those hands needing to touch what is inside. That is the heart of containerization, the idea that the box, not the cargo, becomes the thing that is handled. Before the box moves, it is also claimed by the system. A booking is made, a slot on a ship reserved weeks ahead, a destination declared, a reference number assigned, and the container becomes a line in a manifest, a quiet promise written into schedules. Once, trade was filled with exposed bundles. Sacks were carried, barrels rolled, crates hoisted one by one, and the work was slow and vulnerable to rain, theft, and simple human fatigue. Ships sat in port for days or weeks as laborers loaded and unloaded by muscle and rope, and every transfer risked damage and delay. The container changed that tempo. It turned cargo into a sealed, stackable block, and it allowed ports, ships, and rail lines to behave like parts of one coordinated machine. It also changed the feeling of distance. When a route is stable and repeatable, the mind stops treating faraway places as far away, because the arrival date becomes something you can plan around. Tonight, we let that predictability feel comforting. We follow one box not to hurry it along, but to see how a dependable chain of steps can connect a factory floor to your quiet home. And as we do, the world begins to feel smaller, softer, and strangely well organized. In the background, clocks and scanners and radios keep time. And as one city sleeps, another loads, another sails, another unloads, passing the work forward like a relay. That steady handoff is part of what makes trade feel calm, even when the ocean is wide. To appreciate how much the container reshaped the world, it helps to step back to a dockside scene from not so long ago. Imagine a port where ships arrive like old visitors, and the cargo is not hidden inside neat boxes, but exposed in thousands of separate pieces. There are wooden crates with stenciled names, sacks of grain tied with rope, barrels of oil rolled carefully down planks, and bundles wrapped in canvas. Every item must be counted, lifted, and carried as itself. The dock becomes a busy landscape of hands and hooks, nets and pallets, and the work moves at the pace of muscle. Rain can slow it. Heat can slow it. A misplaced label can slow it. And each time cargo changes hands from truck to dock, from dock to ship, from ship to dock again, the chance of damage or loss quietly grows. Ships in those days often stayed in port for a long time. Loading was not only labor, it was sorting, stacking, and improvising, because cargo came in many shapes and demanded many different treatments. It also made theft tempting, not because people were bad, but because exposed goods invite temptation the way an open window invites wind. So ports required armies of workers, and the costs of moving goods across oceans were higher than many people imagine today. A ship might carry far less than it could physically hold, simply because the work of handling the cargo was the true constraint. Then, slowly, an idea arrived that was almost too plain to sound revolutionary. What if cargo could be placed into one strong, standardized box, sealed once, and handled the same way everywhere? What if the box could move as a unit, and the dock could become a place of lifting and stacking rather than unpacking and repacking? This was not a new desire. People had used crates and containers for centuries, but the missing ingredient was standard agreement, the shared shape that lets a machine be built around it. When that agreement formed, ports began to change their architecture. They built wider aprons, stronger pavement, gantry cranes, container yards, and rail connections designed for boxes, not bundles. The dock became less chaotic and more like a calm grid, and the ship became less like a floating warehouse and more like a careful tower of blocks. Tonight, we do not judge the old world. We simply notice how different the tempo was and how much quiet efficiency was waiting behind one simple, standardized shape. When ships spend fewer days tied to a berth, they spend more days moving, and the ocean becomes a corridor rather than a pause. Over time, the cost per item fell, routes became more regular, and the world learned to trade in a smoother rhythm, like breathing that no longer catches. There is a gentle kind of innovation that does not arrive as a bright new invention, but as a new way of arranging what already exists. Container shipping began like that, with a simple question asked by someone who knew the feeling of delay. In the middle of the 20th century, a trucking entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean spent long hours watching cargo move slowly at crowded docks. He watched crates and barrels handled again and again, and he imagined a calmer method. What if the truck did not need to wait for each box to be lifted? What if the whole load could be lifted at once, sealed and protected, and carried directly onto a ship? The idea was not glamorous. It was practical, almost stubbornly plain, and that plainness gave it strength. In 1956, an old tanker was converted to carry large metal containers on its deck, and it sailed from New Jersey to Houston in a voyage often remembered as a turning point. The ship's name, Ideal X, feels like a quiet hint of the dream, not perfection, just a better way. Ports were not ready at first. They needed new cranes, new yards, new rules, and new habits. Railroads and trucking companies needed equipment that could lift and lock these boxes securely. Customs officials needed new ways to trust what could not be easily inspected piece by piece. And workers needed time to learn a different rhythm, one that depended less on individual handling and more on coordinated flow. Slowly, standards emerged. The box gained a shared set of dimensions and corner fittings, so that a crane built in one country could lift a container built in another. A language of codes and markings formed so the box could be tracked as it crossed borders and time zones. And something subtle happened. The container turned the dock into a transfer point rather than a sorting floor. Instead of cargo spilling into open air, it stayed sealed, protected from weather, and moved quickly between modes. What had once been complicated became repeatable. Repeatability is one of the quiet foundations of reliability. When a process can be repeated, it can be planned. When it can be planned, it becomes calm. Tonight, as we follow our container, we carry that thought with us, that a great shift in the world can begin with a simple wish: fewer touches, fewer delays, and a smoother journey from here to there. In the years that followed, companies invested in dedicated terminals, and coastlines began to grow new silhouettes, tall cranes, and long yards built for stacking. By the 1960s, international standards helped the box travel even more freely, and shipping lines expanded routes as if drawing new, straighter lines across the sea. The change did not happen overnight, but it kept happening, quietly, until the container felt as natural as a suitcase. Once the container proved it could move smoothly from one place to another, a new kind of confidence began to spread. Shipping, which had always been vast, started to become predictable. A ship could leave on schedule, arrive on schedule, and unload in hours rather than days, because the cargo was already arranged into identical blocks. Ports, in response, redesigned themselves around flow. They built container yards like wide outdoor libraries with rows and lanes, lighting for night shifts, and machines that could lift boxes 2, 3, sometimes 5 high. Gantry cranes became the calm giants of the waterfront. They rolled on rails, reached out over the ship, and moved containers with a slow precision that felt almost tender given the weight. The ship itself changed, too. Instead of a mix of holds, compartments, and irregular cargo spaces, container ships became long, open grids designed for stacking. The language of capacity evolved. People began to speak in TEUs, and ships grew from thousands of units to tens of thousands, floating towers of standardized space. Bigger ships made shipping cheaper per box, and cheaper shipping made distant manufacturing and distant markets feel closer. Warehouses adapted. Railroads built double-stack corridors where possible, carrying containers in 2 layers like quiet trains of metal blocks. Trucking firms specialized in drayage, the short-haul movement from factory to port and port to warehouse. The small linking steps that make the long journey continuous. With each improvement, the box became less of an experiment and more of an expectation. The most profound change was psychological. When a system works reliably, people begin to build their lives and businesses around its reliability. Retailers learn to plan seasonal shipments. Factories learn to coordinate parts coming from multiple countries. Ports scheduled berths and cranes like appointments, because time became something you could manage, not merely endure. Even the paperwork began to streamline, moving from paper manifests to electronic records, so that information could keep pace with steel. Tonight, our container sits within this mature rhythm. It belongs to a world where routes are mapped, handoffs are rehearsed, and the ocean is treated like a timetable. And yet, standing on the dock, you can still feel the same simple thing at the heart of it all. A box lifted carefully, moved gently, and placed exactly where it needs to be. so that distance becomes calm. Because the cargo stays sealed, it is protected from rain and rough handling, and the port becomes cleaner, less cluttered, less exposed. The night feels calmer, too, because the work is more like careful placement than constant carrying. Standardization sounds like a dry word, but in the world of shipping, it is a kind of quiet poetry. It is the agreement that lets strangers cooperate without meeting, the shared shape that turns a planet into a connected workshop. A container's corner castings, those thick metal corners, are the key. They are built so twist locks can grab, so cranes can lift, so ships can stack, and so rail cars and trailers can secure the load without improvisation. Because the corners are consistent, the rest of the system can be consistent too. Ports can design their cranes to reach exactly where they must. Ships can design their sail guides to hold each box in its place like a shelf. Railroads can design well cars to cradle the container's weight, and trucking companies can standardize chassis that roll smoothly from gate to highway. International organizations and industry groups refined these standards over decades, settling on common sizes and strength requirements, so that a container built in one part of the world could be trusted in another. Even the markings are standardized enough to be useful. A container's identification code can be read by humans and by cameras, and that code becomes the thread that follows it through the entire journey. In a modern terminal, you see this thread in the quiet order of the yard. Stacks are arranged by destination, by shipping line, by pickup time, by whether a box is full or empty, and by whether it needs power for refrigeration. Planning software assigns each container a place, because a yard is not just storage, it is a moving puzzle. One box must be accessible when its truck arrives. Another must be near the rail spur for an overnight train. Another must be staged for the next ship, which will dock before dawn. All of that order is built on a simple assumption. The box will fit, the corners will lock, the crane will lift, and the stack will stand. Customs and security fit into this order as well. Because a sealed box crosses borders, there are procedures for declarations, inspections, and risk checks, often guided by data long before the ship arrives. The goal is not to interrupt the flow, but to keep the flow trustworthy. When trust exists, the system stays calm. Tonight, our container carries not only goods, but also this shared trust. It is a small steel rectangle participating in a global agreement, and that agreement is what makes distance feel manageable, and the night at the port feel steady. People sometimes call it intermodalism, but you can think of it more simply as a single object that is welcome in many worlds. And now, with our container coded, sealed, and scheduled, we let it begin its smooth handoff from land to sea. The container's quiet superpower is that it does not care how it travels. It is not loyal to ship or train or truck. It simply asks to be lifted by its corners, locked down, and carried onward. In the morning, it might roll behind a truck on a highway. By afternoon, it might ride a train across a continent. By night, it might be stacked on a ship that points its bow toward open water. Each change of mode is a handoff, and handoffs are where many systems become messy. But the container makes the handoff smooth because the cargo inside does not have to be touched. A truck arrives at a factory or consolidation warehouse and backs a chassis into place. The container is lowered onto it. Twist locks click, and the truck pulls away with a single stable unit. At a terminal gate, cameras read the code. Scales measure weight. A clerk's screen confirms appointment and destination, and the driver, often with a small nod and a quiet beep of approval, passes into the yard. In the yard, a straddle carrier or reach stacker lifts the container off the chassis and sets it down into a planned slot. If the container will go by rail, it is carried to a loading track where rail cars wait, low and strong. A crane lifts it again, places it into the well of the car, locks it down, and if there is room and clearance, a second container may be stacked on top. Double stacking is one of those modern efficiencies that feels almost magical, yet it is simply a consequence of standardized corners and predictable weight. A freight train leaves the terminal with a steady pull, crossing deserts, plains, and city edges while most people sleep. The container inside the well car remains sealed, protected from wind and weather, by the simple fact of being closed. At the destination terminal, the process reverses. A crane lifts the container from rail to chassis, and a truck carries it the last miles to a distribution center, where a door opens and the cargo finally meets the air again. When you picture all these steps, you may notice how little drama is involved. It is lift, lock, carry, and set down. The calm comes from repetition. The same twist lock, the same corner, the same crane motion performed thousands of times until it becomes reliable. And reliability at night is soothing. Tonight, our container is moving through these handoffs with almost no friction. It is being passed forward by a chain of machines and people who have learned how to cooperate without fuss, so that distance feels like a sequence, not an obstacle. Because the box stays closed, time is saved at every junction, and the soft work of paperwork and tracking can happen ahead of the physical arrival. The container becomes a traveling room, and the world becomes a set of doors that open smoothly in sequence. For a while, our container travels by road. It rides on a simple chassis, its steel ribs catching the glow of streetlights as the truck eases onto the highway. At night, the road feels wider. Headlights are spaced farther apart, and the hum of tires becomes a steady, low sound that can feel almost meditative. The driver sits high, hands resting on the wheel, watching the lane lines pass in a quiet stream. There is a gentleness to this kind of movement. The container does not sway much because the weight is centered and locked, and the truck carries it with patient momentum. In logistics, this short road leg is often called drayage. It is the linking thread between a warehouse and a port, or between a rail terminal and a distribution center, the small distance that makes the big distance continuous. The system depends on timing. Terminals often use appointment windows, so too many trucks do not crowd the gate at once. Warehouses schedule doors and labor so unloading can happen smoothly, and drivers, who know the rhythm of traffic better than anyone, often choose night hours because the flow is calmer. As the truck passes sleeping neighborhoods, you might notice how trade moves alongside ordinary life without disturbing it. A container rolls past darkened apartments. It crosses bridges where water reflects only a few lights. It passes service roads where maintenance crews work under lamps, and then it returns to open highway. In the distance, a distribution center appears like a lit island. These buildings are modern crossroads, wide and low, with many dock doors lined up like quiet teeth. Inside, conveyor belts and forklifts wait. Pallet jacks stand ready. Workers move with practiced routine, guiding the flow of goods into storage or onto outbound trailers. Some shipments will be broken down and sent to shops. Some will be combined with other goods to form new loads. Some will move again almost immediately, because the warehouse is not a destination, it is a pause. The truck backs into a door, brakes hiss, and the container rests for a moment. The seal may still stay on if the box is only being staged, or the doors may open, and the air inside shifts, releasing the faint scent of cardboard and wood. Tonight, we keep our container mostly intact. We let it remain a closed traveling room, moving through the night with calm purpose, because soon it will return to the harbor, where the sea route begins, and the road, steady and quiet, delivers it there. Along the way, weight limits and safety rules quietly protect the journey, so bridges and pavement are not strained, and the truck remains stable in wind. It is another example of how trade stays calm when the rules are clear and the rhythm is respected. When our container reaches a rail terminal, the atmosphere changes. The air feels more open, and the horizon is lined with tall light poles that cast wide circles of pale illumination. Here, the night work is vast but quiet. Trains rest on parallel tracks like long sleeping animals, and the metal rails hold a faint shine under the lamps. A gantry crane rolls above the tracks on heavy wheels. Its movement is slow and deliberate, and when it stops over a container, the spreader lowers with calm precision, as if it already knows where the corners are. Twist locks engage. The container rises. For a moment, it hangs in mid-air, silent and stable, and then it drifts sideways and settles into the well of a rail car. If the route allows it, another container may be placed on top, creating a double stack. This is one of the reasons rail is so powerful for long distances. One train can carry hundreds of containers, and it can do so with a steady efficiency that reduces fuel use per item moved. The freight train does not hurry. It builds momentum slowly, and once it is moving, it keeps moving with a kind of patient inevitability. At midnight, it passes through industrial edges and open land. It crosses rivers on bridges you may never notice. It slips behind sound walls near neighborhoods and its presence becomes more like a low vibration than a loud event. In the cab, crews follow signals and timetables, communicating with dispatchers who guide traffic across long corridors. In a way, rail is a second map laid over the country, a quiet set of paths that carry the physical world. Intermodal yards are designed to make the handoff simple. The container arrives by truck, is lifted to rail, and later lifted back again, without unpacking. That is the container's gift, that the contents remain undisturbed while the route changes. In the yard, software assigns positions, not unlike the way a port yard plans its stacks. A container has a place, a train has a slot, and the night shift works through the plan with steady repetition. There is something calming about watching a crane repeat the same motions in the dark. Lift, slide, lower, lock. Each cycle is a small success, a neat correction of distance. And as our container settles into its rail car, ready to travel inland or back toward the coast, it feels less like cargo and more like a traveler, carried by a system that knows how to move gently even when it is moving far. Some trains are assembled like sentences, cars sorted and coupled in classification yards where switches click softly and locomotives shuffle pieces into order. By dawn, the right containers are on the right line, heading toward the right terminal, and the work looks effortless only because it is practiced. Eventually, our container returns toward the sea, because this journey is not complete until the box joins a ship. The approach to a container terminal feels like entering a carefully managed city within a city. There are lanes, signs, checkpoints, and a rhythm of arrivals shaped by appointments and cut-off times. A shipping line publishes a schedule weeks in advance. A port assigns a berth. The terminal assigns crane hours, yard space, and labor shifts, because a ship's time at the dock is precious. When the truck arrives at the gate, the process is quiet and quick. Cameras read the container code. A system checks whether the box is expected, whether it is cleared to enter, whether its weight is within limits, and whether its destination matches the booking. If the container needs refrigeration, it is directed toward an area with power points, where reefers can be plugged in and monitored. If it is dangerous goods, it may be placed in a segregated zone with extra spacing and extra checks, because safety is part of calm. In the yard, machines lift the container onto a stack. The stack is chosen not only for storage, but for sequence. Boxes bound for the same ship are grouped so they can be retrieved efficiently. Within that group, some are placed to match the ship's plan because balance matters at sea. Heavy boxes must be placed where the hull can carry them well. Reefer boxes must be placed where they can connect to power. Destination ports are considered too, because a container destined for an earlier stop should be easier to access when it is time to unload. This planning is called stowage, and it is a quiet art. A stowage plan is a map of stability and sequence, designed so the ship can ride safely in waves and so the port can unload without unnecessary reshuffling. While all this happens, documents move through their own channels. Bills of lading, customs declarations, and terminal releases travel as data, checked and matched, so the physical movement can remain smooth. Most of the paperwork is done before the ship even arrives. That is the hidden trick of modern logistics. Information goes ahead, clearing the path for steel. As evening deepens, the ship comes alongside. Lines are thrown and secured. Fenders press gently against the hull, and the terminal wakes into its most practiced work, lifting boxes from stack to deck in a calm, deliberate rhythm. Our container waits in its slot, patient and silent, ready for the moment when it will rise into the air and become, again, a small part of a much larger plan. Sometimes the box passes through scanners that see outlines without opening doors, a gentle way of combining security with flow. The goal is always the same, to keep the chain trustworthy so the night can remain unhurried. Now we stand beneath the ship-to-shore cranes, and it feels a little like standing under a moving bridge. The crane's legs are wide and steady. Its boom reaches out over the ship, and the trolley glides along it with a soft mechanical whir, carrying the spreader like a suspended hand. Below, the container ship's deck is a landscape of rectangular openings and stacked towers. Containers sit in cells, guided by steel rails, aligned so neatly that the ship looks like it was designed for these boxes from the beginning. In a sense, it was. A modern container ship is built around the geometry of the box, and that geometry makes loading feel like careful stacking rather than chaotic packing. The crane operator, high above, works with quiet focus. Some terminals also use cameras and sensors to assist alignment, making the lift smoother and safer. The spreader descends. It touches the container's corners. Locks turn, and then, with a steady pull, the container rises and the deck below becomes visible again. A signal is given. The trolley moves. The container drifts sideways through the air, swinging only slightly, and then it is lowered into its new place. On deck, crews guide it with taglines, their movements slow and practiced, because even small swings can become dangerous when weight is measured in tons. Twist locks secure the box. Sometimes automatic systems help lock from above. Sometimes workers lock manually, moving in patterns they have repeated for years. The sequence is continuous. One box up, one box across, one box down, and then the next, like a long, patient sentence being written in steel. In busy ports, cranes can perform dozens of moves per hour. But the number is less important than the feeling. What matters is that the work is repeatable, and repeatable work becomes calm. The ship is loaded according to a plan that balances weight and destination. If too much weight is high, the ship becomes less stable. If too much is forward or aft, the hull's stress changes. So the stowage plan is both a safety document and a choreography script. As our container rises and settles into its cell, it joins a grid that will soon be carried across open water. From above, the yard and its stacks look like a quiet mosaic. From below, the ship looks like a city wall. And between them, the crane keeps moving softly, steadily, as if the night itself were lifting and placing the world into order. Before sailing, weights are checked and recorded because knowing the true mass of each box helps the plan stay truthful. Lashing crews tighten rods and turnbuckles, building a web of restraint that holds the stacks steady when waves arrive, so the journey can remain quiet, even far from shore. When the ship finally leaves the harbor, the noise of the terminal fades behind it like a shoreline receding. The vessel moves slowly at first, guided by tugboats and pilots, turning through channels that feel narrow for something so large. Then the water opens, the ship's bow points into deeper sea, and the motion becomes more even, a long, steady glide. From the deck, the stacks of containers look like quiet buildings. Some are painted bright, some are faded by sun and salt, and each one carries its code like a small address. At night, navigation lights blink with calm discipline, red and green and white, a simple language that keeps distance polite in the dark. Deep inside, the engine turns with a low, constant rhythm. Modern container ships are built for endurance. They run for days or weeks, maintaining speed with careful fuel management and continuous monitoring, because the ocean does not reward sudden effort. On the bridge, officers watch radar and charts. They track other vessels, weather systems, and their own position, following established sea lanes that keep traffic orderly, like invisible highways on open water. The ship itself is guided by long planning. Schedules are set. Fuel is arranged. Port calls are timed. And yet, at sea, there is also surrender to nature. Waves lift the hull and set it down again. Wind changes the feel of the air. Occasional rain rinses salt from surfaces. The container stacks remain still only because lashings hold them, and because the ship's design is built around stability. If you could listen closely at night, you might hear the faint creak of steel under gentle stress, the sound of a structure flexing as it moves like a slow, deep breath. You might also hear the small sounds of life, footsteps in corridors, a door closing softly, the quiet talk of crew who live within this floating world. Container ships are not crowded with people. A surprisingly small crew can operate a vessel that carries thousands of boxes, because so much of the handling happens in ports, and so much of the voyage is steady transit. Out on open water, the ship becomes a moving island of routine. Meals at set times, watches rotated, maintenance done patiently, logs written, and always the steady forward motion, carrying our container across a wide stretch of sea. Above, stars can appear with a clarity that cities often steal. Below, the cargo rests unseen inside its steel rooms. Tonight, we let that image settle. A vast ship, quietly moving through darkness, carrying ordinary goods with extraordinary steadiness, as if the world has learned how to cross distances without waking itself. Far behind, the port lights shrink, and ahead, only the sea remains, calm and open. At sea, the ship follows corridors that have been used in some form for centuries, but that now feel more orderly, like lines drawn with a steady hand. There are straits where land narrows the water into a single passage, and canals where humans carved shortcuts through earth to reduce time and distance. The Suez Canal, for example, links the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, letting ships avoid a long route around Africa. The Panama Canal joins Atlantic and Pacific, lifting ships through locks like slow elevators and returning them gently to the ocean on the other side. There are other choke points, too, places with simple names that carry enormous meaning for trade. The Strait of Malacca, a narrow passage between Southeast Asian coasts. The Strait of Hormuz, where much energy trade passes. The English Channel, busy with crossings and careful separation schemes. These routes are not only geography, they are agreements. Ships follow traffic lanes, report positions, and obey rules designed to keep movement safe and predictable, because predictability is the true luxury of commerce. Port calls form a loop. A ship may depart one coast, cross a sea, call at a series of hubs, unload and reload, and continue, its journey shaped by a network of schedules that align like gears. Many ships operate on fixed services, weekly strings, so a shipper can plan around a known departure and a known arrival. Time in this world is measured in windows and cutoffs. A container must arrive at the terminal before a deadline. A ship must leave before a tide changes. A canal transit must be booked. And yet, the overall feeling is not frantic. It is methodical. The ship continues at a steady speed, often optimized not for maximum velocity, but for fuel efficiency and reliability. In recent years, many lines have practiced slow steaming, reducing speed to save fuel and lower costs, turning the voyage into something even more patient. The container inside does not mind. It is sealed and stable, and the world around it is a moving calendar. Weather is the wild note in this calm song. A storm can shift a route. Winds can slow progress. Ports can delay. But the system is built with buffers and alternatives, and the ocean's unpredictability is met with planning rather than panic. As our ship approaches its next waypoint, the sea feels like a quiet conveyor, and the horizon remains soft. The container stays where it is, held by steel and lashings, and the ship continues its gentle work, carrying the ordinary across the extraordinary distance of water. Tonight, we allow these corridors of trade to feel like a peaceful map, lines of connection that help the world share without needing to shout. Not every container is content to sit in silence. Some carry cargo that must be kept cool, and for them, the box becomes a small traveling climate. These are refrigerated containers, often called reefers, and they hum softly with their own machines. Inside, temperature and airflow are controlled so fruit can stay crisp, dairy can remain safe, and medicines can arrive with their chemistry intact. A reefer is not a freezer by default. It can hold a wide range of temperatures, from chilled to frozen, depending on what it carries, and the settings are recorded and monitored like a patient heartbeat. At the terminal, reefers are placed in special rows with electrical outlets. Workers plug them in, and systems track whether they are drawing power, whether the temperature is steady, and whether any alarm appears. On a ship, reefers are stacked where power connections are available. Cables run to the units, and the ship's electrical system supports hundreds, sometimes thousands of these small cold rooms at once. The cold chain is a quiet marvel. It allows cherries to travel across oceans and still taste like a brief season. It allows flowers to arrive bright and fragrant after long journeys. It allows vaccines and delicate medical supplies to move safely, connecting laboratories to clinics through a steady refrigerated path. There is care in that steadiness. Temperature changes are gentle, not sudden. Air must circulate so cold does not pool in one corner and leave another too warm. Doors must stay sealed, logs must be kept, and at each handoff, people check readings the way you might check a sleeping child's forehead, not with alarm, but with attention. Even non-refrigerated containers have their own vulnerabilities. Some cargo dislikes moisture, so desiccant bags are hung inside. Some cargo requires ventilation, so vents are opened in a controlled way. Some cargo is heavy and must be blocked and braced to prevent shifting at sea. In every case, the container is a small room with its own needs, and the global system has learned how to respect those needs without slowing down. Tonight, we let our container pass near the reefer stacks, listening to their gentle hum. It is comforting to know that the world can be both vast and careful at the same time. That across long distances, tenderness can exist in the form of temperature settings, airflow, and steady power. And as the ship continues, carrying boxes of many kinds, the reefers keep humming, the standard containers keep resting, and the cargo sleeps inside steel, held by design. The ocean is wide, but the care is precise. In the dark, that precision feels like reassurance, a quiet proof that modern trade can still move gently. While the container is physical, its journey is accompanied by something almost weightless: information. At every major step, the box is seen. A camera reads its code. A gate system records entry. A terminal notes its position in the yard. A crane logs the moment it was loaded. A ship reports its departure. A port records its arrival. These events become a timeline, and the timeline becomes trust. For shippers and receivers, this is what makes the journey feel calm. Not because the ocean is predictable, but because the movement is visible enough to plan around. Long ago, tracking meant paper and phone calls, and updates arrived slowly. Now, data travels faster than the steel itself. Electronic messages share manifests and releases. Customs agencies receive declarations before the ship reaches shore. Warehouses prepare labor because the estimated arrival is known. Retailers time promotions because the cargo will likely be present. Even the ship's position is often broadcast through systems like AIS, an automatic identification signal that helps vessels avoid collisions and helps ports coordinate arrivals. To you, as a listener drifting toward sleep, it can be soothing to imagine the world not as chaos, but as a sequence of quiet confirmations. A ping, a scan, a timestamp, a small green light on a screen. The container does not need to know any of this. It sits in its cell, held by steel and lashings, indifferent to the data that follows it. But the people who rely on it find comfort in those updates because uncertainty is what makes the mind race. Logistics tries to reduce uncertainty, not by controlling the sea, but by clarifying the steps. Even delays are softened by information. A storm is predicted. A port is congested. A berth is shifted. A new ETA is issued. And instead of panic, plans adjust. Trucks are rescheduled. Warehouse doors are reassigned. Rail slots are moved. It is not perfect, but it is orderly. There is also a quiet discipline in the documents. A bill of lading states what was shipped and under what terms. A packing list describes contents. A certificate may confirm origin or quality. These papers, now often digital, travel alongside the container like a soft shadow, ensuring that when the box arrives, it can move again without friction. Tonight, this digital thread makes the physical world feel less heavy. Steel moves slowly, but information moves ahead, smoothing the path. And as our ship continues through darkness, the container rests, and somewhere, screens update in calm increments, telling the world gently that the journey is still underway. For some shipments, sensors even report temperature or shock, adding another layer of reassurance for sensitive goods. It is like a quiet heartbeat carried across oceans. As the ship nears its destination, the port appears first as a glow on the horizon. It is a different kind of city light, lower and more industrial, spread wide along the water like a necklace laid flat. Even before sunrise, the harbor is awake. Pilots board ships from small boats, climbing ladders with steady hands. Tugboats circle, pushing and guiding with gentle bursts of power. Radio calls are short and calm. Buoys and channel markers blink with patient regularity. A ship's arrival is not a surprise. It is an appointment kept. The berth has been planned, the cranes have been assigned, and the yard has been prepared to receive new stacks of steel. As the vessel comes alongside, lines are secured, and the port's choreography begins again, this time in reverse. Containers are lifted from the ship and placed on waiting trailers or on transporters that carry them into the yard. Some go directly to rail. Some are staged for truck pickup. Some are moved to inspection areas. Some are plugged in if they are reefers. So the cold chain continues without interruption. The night shift works with practiced routine. In many ports, operations run 24 hours a day because ships are too expensive to sit idle and because trade does not belong to one time zone. While one coast sleeps, another is loading. While one continent eats dinner, another is beginning its day. The port becomes a relay point in this global handoff, accepting the baton from the sea and passing it smoothly to land. Customs and border procedures are part of this handoff, yet they are designed as much as possible to keep the flow steady. Risk-based inspections focus attention where it is most needed. Many containers clear without being opened because trust is built through documentation, patterns, and systems that look for the unusual. When a box is opened, it is done with care, and it is closed again, resealed, and returned to the stream. Our container is lifted gently down. It touches land again with a soft thud and a slight shiver of steel. Then it is carried into the yard, placed into a new stack, and for a moment it rests. It has crossed an ocean, and yet the system treats that crossing as one step among many. That is the quiet genius of container shipping. It turns immense journeys into a series of calm, manageable handoffs. And standing near the quay in the dark, listening to cranes and water and distant engines, you can feel how the world stays connected without ever needing to raise its voice. Nearby, in small offices, planners adjust yard maps and truck gates, matching labor to demand like careful conductors. The port keeps moving, not through rush, but through coordination, and that coordination feels almost like calm music. By now, our container has begun to feel familiar, like a character you can recognize even among thousands of similar faces. And it is worth pausing to notice what this character changed. A standardized box lowered the cost of moving goods so dramatically that distance began to matter less. When shipping becomes cheaper and more reliable, new patterns of production become possible. Factories can specialize. Regions can focus on what they do well. Parts can be made in one place, assembled in another, and sold in many others, all stitched together by predictable maritime schedules. Ports evolved into hubs, and hubs shaped cities. Some waterfronts became forests of cranes. Intermodal rail corridors expanded. Warehouses grew larger and more automated, designed to receive containers, break them down, and send goods onward with minimal delay. New jobs appeared: planners, dispatchers, stowage coordinators, terminal operators, systems designers. Old skills adapted. Longshore work shifted toward operating powerful machines, guiding steel with calm precision. The container also changed the rhythm of inventory. Instead of keeping vast stockpiles, many businesses learned to rely on regular arrivals, a practice often called just in time. When it works, it can feel elegant, like a well-timed kitchen that keeps ingredients fresh and space uncluttered. And it made the variety of everyday life expand quietly. You can find fruit from distant seasons, electronics built from global parts, textiles woven far away, and tools made to exact specifications, all arriving as if the world were one long neighborhood. This is not magic. It is repetition, standardization, and trust applied at scale. Of course, scale brings complexity. More nodes means more chances for delay. A storm, a closed channel, or a crowded berth can ripple outward. But the system has learned to respond with rerouting, rescheduling, and buffering, the same way the body adjusts when you walk into colder air. In recent years, the world has become more aware of these supply chains, noticing them when they are strained. That awareness can be unsettling in daytime, but tonight we hold it gently. Because what is truly remarkable is not that the system is flawless, but that it works at all, across oceans, across borders, across time. A steel box, built to a shared standard, can travel from a factory to your city with a quiet steadiness that earlier generations would have found astonishing. And the greatest sign of success is that you rarely think about it. You simply live within the abundance it enables, and you fall asleep without needing to trace the route. Tonight, tracing it softly, we can feel gratitude for the calm engineering of trade and for the simple box that taught the world how to move without noise. Even the calmest systems have moments when the rhythm stutters. A fog can slow a harbor. High winds can pause crane work. A mechanical issue can delay a departure. A surge of arrivals can crowd a terminal, and stacks can grow taller than planned. In those moments, logistics reveals itself because the quiet background work becomes visible. But resilience in container shipping is not built from heroics. It is built from options. Shipping lines can adjust rotations. Ports can extend gate hours. Terminals can add labor shifts. Railroads can run extra trains. Warehouses can rearrange schedules, moving some work forward and some work later, so the whole chain does not seize. Planners also build buffers, not large enough to waste, but enough to soften the unexpected. Some goods are shipped earlier than strictly necessary. Some are stored in regional warehouses. Some parts have alternative suppliers. The idea is not to eliminate uncertainty, which is impossible, but to keep uncertainty from becoming panic. When a disruption occurs, information becomes especially important. ETAs are updated. Gate appointments are rescheduled. Drivers are redirected. Customers are informed. It is the same gentle pattern we saw earlier. Clarify the steps, and the mind can stay calm. There is also a kind of humility in the system. The ocean is not a conveyor belt with perfect timing. It is a living environment with weather, waves, and currents. Ships move at speeds that respect fuel and safety. Ports work within tides and channels, and yet, because the container is standardized, rerouting is more feasible than it once was. A box can be shifted to a different ship, a different port, a different rail line, and still be handled smoothly because the corners and locks and cranes remain the same. That sameness is a quiet form of resilience. It means a problem in one place does not necessarily require a new method everywhere else. It means alternative paths can be used without rewriting the rules. When the system recovers, it often does so gradually. Stacks shrink, schedules normalize, ships regain their slots, warehouses catch up, and soon the background hum returns to its usual, almost invisible level. Tonight, we hold this truth gently. Not everything is guaranteed, but much is prepared. And preparation is what lets a vast system remain calm, even when it is stretched. Our container, for its part, waits patiently through any pause, because it is built for waiting. Steel does not mind a cue. It only needs the next handoff, the next lift, the next quiet click of a lock. And when that click comes, the journey continues, steady again, as if the world has exhaled. Now we let our container complete its last ordinary steps. After the ocean crossing, after the cranes and rail yards and gates, it is carried by a truck to a distribution center that glows softly at the edge of the city. The building is wide and quiet, its doors lined up like calm promises, and inside the air smells faintly of cardboard and clean concrete. The chassis rolls into place, brakes hiss. The engine idles, then rests. A worker checks the code, confirms the paperwork, and with a practiced motion, cuts the seal. The doors swing open, and the container releases the stillness it has been holding. Inside, boxes are stacked neatly, braced for travel, waiting for this moment when the journey becomes useful. Pallets slide out on forks. Barcodes are scanned. Items are sorted into smaller streams, some headed to shops, some headed to homes, some headed to other warehouses where they will wait for the right season. And soon, the steel box is empty again, ready to be cleaned, inspected, and sent back into the network to carry something else. This is another quiet miracle of the system. Containers do not belong to one story. They circulate, they loop, they travel again and again, accumulating dents and faded paint, becoming more ordinary with each voyage and more valuable because of that ordinariness. Some will be repaired and returned. Some will be repurposed into storage or small buildings. But many simply keep moving, participating in the world's steady exchange. If you think back to the port at night, to the cranes lifting in silence, you can feel how a single standard box turned trade into a calm choreography. It reduced the number of times cargo is touched. It protected goods from weather. It made schedules possible. It connected ship, rail, and road into one flowing sentence. And then, having done all that, it disappeared again, leaving you with the simple experience of having what you need, without requiring your mind to chase the path. Tonight, you have followed the path anyway, softly. You have watched the sea lanes and the yards and the warehouses. You have listened to the quiet hum of logistics, a kind of modern lullaby made of steel and planning and patient motion. Now you can let the world return to background. You can let the container become invisible again as it was always meant to be. The port will keep working in the dark. Ships will keep gliding through open water. Trains will keep passing through midnight landscapes. And in the morning, life will feel ordinary, and that ordinariness will be a gift. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts unstack themselves one by one like boxes returning gently to rest. The world is moving calmly, and you do not need to move with it. Good night.